Right, we're back for the fifth instalment of the best All-Ireland winners of the last 16 years. I'm joined by Cahair O'Kane again. Cahair, this is a pretty sweet one, I have to say. Kerry 2009 against Dublin 2016. You're looking at a Kerry team that were looking to avoid back-to-back All-Ireland final defeats for the first time since the 60s. Jack O'Connor looking to win his third All-Ireland, and on the other side you have Dublin team in 2016 where Jim Gavin is looking to win his third All-Ireland, so they're fairly finely poised.
They are. Like that Kerry team probably had a lot of demons hanging on them, that even though they, do you know, it's a funny thing about that Kerry team, like, you know, they won so many All-Irelands in that decade, and yet there's oftentimes more talked about the ones that they didn't win. Or the ones that they did win were soft, and they're probably not given anywhere near the level of credit they deserve, because you get through those teams and the quality they had. You know, they were brilliant teams, and they were, you know, now when Dublin win All-Ireland finals by 6, 7, 8 points, we just say how brilliant they are. When Kerry were doing it, was sure everybody else's crap. It's a soft All-Ireland. They didn't have to beat anybody to win it, so you know it's probably a wee bit harsh on that generation of Kerry players. In 2009, there were a few of them tipping towards the tail end of the scale. It was probably a transforming team into the team that played again 2011, and then a lot of those fellas then went on and played 2014 again. But the Dublin team was just, I mean, the Dublin team are different from anybody else in the way that they've just constantly evolved. No, I think that's their biggest strength. No team that we've ever seen in history has evolved as sort of organically as that Dublin team have, where you don't even notice them changing to a point you think, you know, such and such isn't playing this week, or Fally McMahon's not playing this week, or Cian O'Sullivan, or whoever it is, and they just go on. And within a fortnight, you can forget about players. You know, you can literally be thinking, geez, John Small didn't play this week. He's still to come back in. Or, you know, you're 5 games into this year's National League, which we might be stuck at forever. But, you know, Dermot Connolly hasn't kicked the ball. And you just nearly forget about what they don't have some weeks because of what they do have.
Absolutely true. Just a reminder for anyone who doesn't know what's going on with this video. So we're doing the best All-Ireland winners of the last 16 years. We've kind of drawn them in lots, and we're on the fifth one here, which is Dublin 2016 against Kerry 2009. We've already had Tyrone 05 against Dublin 2018, Cork 2010, Dublin 2017, and Kerry 2004 against Kerry 2014, and a brilliant one, Dublin 2013 against Donegal 2012. So if we just jump into this sort of particular matchup, and we even look at, I suppose we should probably even just start off with the teams, because if you look at this Dublin team in 2016, they needed a replay to beat Mayo. So the first game was 2-9 to 15 points, Cillian O'Connor with that late leveller. Then the second game, Dublin won 115 to 114. And it was probably one of the craziest games going, actually, that if we can just jump back to that drawn game again, because Dublin hadn't themselves scored inside the first 22 minutes. They somehow were 3 points ahead, because it was 2 goals to 3 points, and it was a Kevin McLaughlin own goal and it was a Colin Boyle own goal in a rotten day, and somehow, possibly the unluckiest Mayo team ever to be behind after 22 minutes.
Probably the luckiest Mayo team not to win, because they brought everything that they had to bring that day. You know, as there are other finals that they feel they might have won, and obviously the Donny Vaughan red card and that final is the one that they maybe look back on and think, if we hadn't done that, if that hadn't happened. But in terms of doing everything that they could have done themselves, you know, on as you said, a stinking wet day. Like, I always remember that Conor Lane allowed the game to flow so much that day, you know, blew so little in that first half especially. And, you know, even the nature of the own goals, you know, I think was it Colin Boyle's was a tackle and actually dislodged the ball, and then it came back off him.
I think Dean Rocket just spilled it, and he was kind of coming in and he drew a boot at it and just towed it straight in.
And there was so much turnover in that Mayo defence in that first half especially, and, you know, did so much right, and still didn't get over the line. And yeah, you take it on the other side, and we're talking about Dublin. That's probably their worst. It is their worst performance in an All Ireland final across the spell that they've been in them now. And they were, even though it was Mayo that kicked the equaliser, it was Dublin who were the lucky side to get out with a draw over the course of the 70 minutes. But then, we probably saw a lot in the replay, even though the replay was a very tight game again, and they sneaked through, and I think it needed Cormac Costello that day. That was the day he came on, kicked 3 points to sort of. But in that, it showed the depth that they had, and also the absolute ruthlessness of Jim Gavin. That he took his team, and he made, what was it, 3-4 changes between the drawn final and the replay, and called serious names like Bernard Brogan, and to do that for an All Ireland final replay was, this wasn't Tomas O'Shea and Gooch being dropped for drinking against Antrim, or what I mean. This wasn't a third round qualifier, or this was an All Ireland final replay. And for Jim Gavin to have the stones to do that, it was just a crazy thing to do. In a way, it seemed crazy at the time, but it turned out brilliantly.
Because beforehand we talked about, you're having a BBC moment there, are you? Who do you think, Anna, Dublin 16 or Kerry 09?
You think Dublin or Kerry, Anna?
No.
Go you back up and see Mammy.
Right, so just to jump back in again, you were talking about those changes that Jim Gavin made that worked out. One of the big, and there's so many subplots to this, but one of the big subplots that you and I talked about beforehand was that Stephen Cluxton had that perceived meltdown against Kerry in the semi-final, whereas for the replay at All Ireland, Stephen Rochford made a big call by dropping David Clarke and bringing in Rob Henley, and obviously that backfired massively with the penalty and the black card sort of situation as well. So you have to be careful about your gambles.
We're talking about ballsy decisions and gambles that pay off or don't pay off, and sometimes it is just because that debate in Mayo was still going on to this day, whether David Clarke or Rob Henley, and James Horan is changing and chopping and still doesn't seem to know quite which to choose. And Rob Henley's kicking is a strength over David Clarke, and David Clarke struggled in the drawn game, struggled to get the ball out. So there was logic, behind what he was doing, and it just, Henley's just maybe not got the assuredness and the confidence, and he just is maybe a more nervy goalkeeper under that bit of pressure, and that's what happened that day. And obviously that's part of the decision you make as well, whether he can handle that pressure. So, I think you're singing mad now in the background. You're singing Frozen songs, but it just, what I mean. It was the same decision in essence that Jim Gavin made. It was a ballsy call. It was a big call, and had it gone right, Rob Henley has had in the past very, very good games against Dublin. You've seen him in league games making, it was at the league game a couple of years ago, making massive saves. 3-4, a brilliant game in Croke Park was last year in the league, and he is a brilliant goalkeeper. It just didn't work that day, and all of that combined, Dublin again were in a lot of trouble in the replay until that mistake by Henley. And obviously, even from the point of, again, their quality, like Dermot Connolly's penalty, you mightn't think much of a penalty, but it was absolutely inch perfect, and it had to be inch perfect because David Clarke would have got there otherwise. Another inch inside, David Clarke saves it. Another inch outside, it hits the post. Inch perfect.
The black cards were such a big thing in those games, wasn't it? James McCarthy got one, Johnny Cooper got one, Lee Keegan crucially got one also. You actually talk about these gambles of bringing guys into the team. In 2009, Mike McCarthy was prized back into the Kerry team by Jack O'Connor, and much like for Jim Gavin making his switches, it kind of worked out because one of the big weaknesses of that Kerry team that won the All-Ireland in 2009 was the fact that they had a fairly ropey defence.
They did, and you can see even when you look at the names, the transition of that defence from even the middle of the decade, over those couple of years, even just on paper, it just does not have the same cut about it. It doesn't have the same strength. You definitely would be looking at that Kerry defence and thinking, can he cope there? Would he cope there? Would he manage there? Whereas, you probably don't look at the Dublin defence the same way, even though Kerry's forward line is as good as it is. You don't look at the Dublin defence with the same fear of being completely overrun. As you say, bringing Mike McCarthy back was a real sign that they were struggling, and that year really was, it really was a struggle for them for a lot of the year. They didn't look for a long part of it as All Ireland winners. Like, they were stuffed by Cork and Munster, beaten by 8 points. They were a last minute penalty save against Sligo. Fortunate enough to get past Antrim. Well, not fortunate, but better side against Antrim, but certainly not the convincing manner of victory you'd expect for Kerry against Antrim. So all the pieces were looking like, this thing isn't going to fall into place. And then, probably just the attacking quality they had, if that clicks, they're still very, very hard to deal with, and that's what happened.
Yeah, and then just even a quick look at that attack line. Well, actually, we might as well just touch on the defence. Diarmuid Murphy in goals, Mark O'Shea, Tommy Griffin, Tom O'Sullivan, Tomás O'Shea, Mike McCarthy, Killian Young, then Darragh O'Shea and Seamus Scanlon in midfield. Half forward line of Paul Galvin, Declan O'Sullivan, Tom Kennelly, Colm Cooper, Tommy Walsh, who scored 4 from play, and Darren O'Sullivan, who scored 1-1. It is definitely that an attack line that's going to do damage on most. Do you see that causing enough trouble for this Dublin team? Because that Kerry backline is definitely going to struggle against those Dub forwards.
Probably the short answer is probably not, really. Like, and that's a strange thing to say, because it is a fearsome attack. Like, it is a deadly attack, but it's also an unbelievably good Dublin defence. And for any, you know what I mean? So you're not going to see the Kerry forwards win 6 battles the way they made against other teams, or 5 or 6 battles in those individuals. You're probably going to see them win 3 at best. And then that's probably not enough to beat that Dublin team. You're looking at the matchups, as they were just talking there, like Tommy Walsh, Philly McMahon's naturally suited. Physically, even we saw a sort of a later stage of their career version of that rerun this year. Like, and Tommy Walsh got the better of the first day. Like, we'll always remember before the two of them came on and the replay, like, and Philly McMahon kind of nearly hopping off him on the sideline before they got out of the gates. It wasn't going to happen again because Walsh had a big impact, but a kind of a peak Philly McMahon against a youngish Tommy Walsh is probably slightly different, and you would fancy maybe Philly McMahon just at that stage of their careers. You're talking 09 Walsh against 16 McMahon. Like, so
I'd nearly debate that one, because Tommy Walsh had been Young Footballer of the year before, and you talk about the Twin Towers with Kieran Donaghy, and it was just after that the Sydney Swans took away. Was it the Sydney Swans that he went to the AFL? Yeah. Tom Kennelly, of course, had come back from the Swans. Ty Kennelly had come back from the Swans.
Hey, look, there's definitely a debate on it. There's a huge argument on it, but I just, like, Philly McMahon for those couple of peak years of probably 14, 15, 16 was as good a defender as there was in the country, and he relished that physicality. This is not a fella who would have been physically overawed by Tommy Walsh, which was Tommy Walsh's thing. He's such a big unit to try and play against. So I just think you're talking a peak Philly McMahon against just probably a pre-peak Tommy Walsh, which is maybe just twisting the debate in McMahon's favour.
If we were to look at some of the players on this, well, actually no, more so, like, we've kind of said that some of these Kerry players were towards the latter end of their career, but there was a lot of experience there, and I think that a lot of the times that also is a byword for ruthlessness. In the first couple of minutes of the game, Kerry could have had 2 red cards. I mean, there was the famous hit from Kennelly on Nicholas Murphy, shoulder straight into the jaw. Then you had Paul Galvin coming across Donncha O'Connor, which is on the screen there. And actually the free that Kerry took led to that goal for Colm O'Neill just afterwards. So is there anything to be said about the ruthlessness of this Kerry team, that they were a little bit older, they're kind of, old dogs for the hard road, that they might have had a little bit of experience on Dublin?
I'd say probably their street smarts was what dragged them through a lot of that. You know what I mean? Like, without them playing the way they were in the year, they needed that doggedness, that wee bit of knowing how to get out of a game, and that that carried them into the latter stages of the All Ireland. And then, as you say, the Ty Kennelly thing and the stuff at the start of the All Ireland final, like at the time, it was only when the revelations came out in the book and people looked back at it and thought, Jesus, you should have been away. But it's the kind of stuff that probably happens in every single All Ireland final, and you just don't know about it. Whereas, you know what I mean? Even the fuss about that only came years afterwards, and it was, it probably should have been a red card, surely. But it's, you know what I mean? You could go back through All Ireland finals and find, like, umpteen examples, countless examples of stuff. Like, I think, like, I can remember, like, John Small has been sent off in enough All Ireland finals to do at this stage, but the one against Mayo where he sort of took a swing at Killian O'Connor right on half time, like, and stands out in my head, and that he probably should have been sent off, but it happens, like, it just, and I think there's maybe a wee bit much made of that incident, in that's books for you. You know what I mean? You get bits, and it's probably just a wee bit too close to the bone in terms of a lot of the fellas still playing at the time, like, and it's still been relevant. Had that book been 5, 6, 7 years down the line when everybody's retired, sure, it's great crack then.
That's true. But you mentioned John Small there, and we were talking about the matchups. Would John Small go up against Paul Galvin, and how long would the two of them last on the field if they were getting stuck in each other?
How long would they last? God, in an All Ireland final, they'd probably get a wee bit more leeway, but it would be a fun battle. Like, Paul Galvin at that stage of his career was some operator. As good a playmaker, as good a real intelligent footballer, but look, in terms of a man to shut players like that out of football, have there been many in the history that are as effective as John Small is? Like, I was having this conversation with somebody not that long ago, like, how he just looks he just looks twice as bad since he got the haircut. He just looks like an absolute tank, a machine, and I don't know, because Paul Galvin's thing was his intelligence and his ability to drift into space and create space and find it where it usually wasn't. And John Small's so good at, like, look at Peter Hart. I suppose we in Ulster maybe look at that as the sort of pinnacle of that battle, or how John Small has defended, like, and he just sticks to you like glue. And, like, Peter Hart is a bloody intelligent footballer who would find space, and time his runs and all the rest of that. And John Small is just so good at shutting it down, that it's hard to know, would Galvin have had a hugely significant impact on the game? It's hard to know because of the way that the two of them play. I would say that Small would have been hard to shake.
Would you give much hope to Kerry in some of the other matchups, like Mark O'Shea? Could he shut down Dean Rock? And I think this was the first All Ireland series where I thought Rock was really brilliant, especially in that replay. Like, Brian Fenton has to be shut down as well. And then, of course, like we've talked about, the perceived weakness of that Kerry backline in those 2 All Ireland finals, the drawn one and the replay in 2016. 2 defenders were man of the match. one John Small for Dublin, and then the other one being Michael Fitzsimons, who was brought into the team for the replay. So are there matchups that you're seeing there that could work for Kerry? Can Darragh O'Shea at the fag end of his career, can he make an impact here?
You mentioned Mark O'Shea against Dean Rock, and I'm not 100% sure that that's. Would you put Mark O'Shea on Dean Rock, or would you put Tommy Griffin on him and put Mark O'Shea on Kevin McManaman? It's hard to tell, and I think the fact that we just had a wee look at it, and the Dublin defenders were much easier to match to the Kerry forwards. You're really an instinctive, right? Darren O'Sullivan, there's Davy Byrne, there's pace, there's the same physical size. They'll be able they'll be matched for each other. Michael Fitzsimmons looks naturally against the Gooch. Johnny Cooper then goes out on Declan O'Sullivan. James McCarthy's perfect for Ty Kennelly. John Small's perfect for Paul Galvin. It's easy. It's the other end, it's not so easy. You're looking at, do you do O'Shea on Rock or do you do Griffin on Rock? Like Rock at that stage, probably I'd be inclined to go Tommy Griffin. And I think for the fact that Rock is an incredibly, they talk about intelligent footballers. He probably, everybody talks about his freeze. He doesn't get enough credit for just how exceptionally brainy he is in terms of that ability to hold that wide position, time that run on the loop, and just kick it blind. He must talk about practice. We all know the practice. He's spoken about it and his freeze and stuff, but the practice he must put into that shot in open play, that he kicks it blind from so many angles on the field, and he just knows the angle as soon as the ball's set in his hands, that he just kicks it.
You know what he reminds me of?
You don't see him miss too often.
He reminds me of one of these wide receivers in NFL, one of the sort of, if you can sort of broadly say it, a corner forward who makes a pre-designed run, gets the ball, and then obviously goes off and tries to score a touchdown. But he's got his pre-designed sort of run, or he knows what he's doing, or he knows how to tweak it to basically get into the exact same position all the time, to have his route, if you will. And then it's like watching him kick a free, but from play. It really is it's quite amazing how often he manages to put the same point over the bar.
That's exactly what it's like, watching him kick a free from play, and it's I think it's part of the era we're in football as well, where a lot of the moves, obviously, teams in the past had kind of pre-rehearsed moves, and we thought Armagh in 2002. Actually watched that. This GA now and this ability to watch full arcade games is just going to be brilliant, and it's also going to be probably the end of my marriage. So because
you'll be seeing Frozen on your own.
There's so much, but that Armagh team, it was diagonal ball. It was all pre-designed, and every forward knew when the ball came down one wing it was kicked. What I mean? Teams were doing that kind of stuff always, but this is a new level, and it's almost as if the ball's in a certain position, and Dean Rock knows right now is when I go, and they just set the ball into his hands, and it's so hard. And that's why you'll see Dean Rock score maybe 4 or 5 points from play, and maybe never win a single primary possession in a game. He's not really a forward that they look to win primary possession. They're not going to kick much at him. And if they do, it's maybe, it's a kick to bring them up the pitch. It's not a kick into a dangerous area. It's often a kick into a wide area where he's maybe going to win it that wee bit more easily, and yet he still end up with 4 points from play because of his ability and the difficulty that there is in defending against that. You must be, Jesus, imagine marking Dean Rock and you come off and he doesn't want a single ball off you all day, and yet he comes off with 4 points off you. And simply because he took that pop off the shoulder and he just kicked it. And I suppose that's the really, really top class defenders. I suppose Keith Higgins was a master of it, of really being on a man's toes and shuffling left to right and keeping the shot away. And that's where that Mayo team probably had that Dublin team. They didn't allow those shots off, and that was why they troubled Dublin so much.
And we're going to have to make a decision, I suppose, before we throw it out to the public vote on our game.ie underneath the video. But like, this probably was the last kick of a lot of this Kerry team. So if you jump from 2009's team to 2010, you didn't have Tommy Walsh because he was down under. Ty Kennelly had gone back down also. Paul Galvin, I think, for that game against Down, they got knocked out in the quarterfinal. He was suspended. I feel like Tomas O'Shea wasn't playing as well. Someone might correct me on that one if he was. Whereas this Dublin team, this was the most error-strewn final in the drawn one against Mayo, and somehow they found a way. And the second day, I know Cillian O'Connor missed the free, but again, they found a way. So do you give it to the Kerry team that came back from a really poor start to the season, had their issues with, a couple of boys going on the beer and getting dropped, but then ultimately went from 1-3 to a point behind to hammering Cork out the gate? Or do you give it to a Cork or a Dublin team that beat a much superior opposition in the 16 final?
I think when you put it in those terms, they're quite similar All Irelands. They're about teams that maybe necessarily weren't at their best, but found a way. And again, go back to the lack of credit that Kerry team has maybe been given. We all laud and talk about Dublin now and their ability to find a way, no matter what is thrown at them. They just find a way, particularly over the last 18 months, at times to not get beaten. As much as to win, the league games and stuff, and they were getting draws, and they were getting, even earlier this year, coming back from the dead against Monaghan and different, that's one of the huge strengths of this Dublin team, is that ability to do that. And it was probably a big strength of that Kerry team as well that year, that, outside of the Cork game in Munster, they just found a way to not get beat for long enough until they remembered who you won, and look, I think in terms of deciding, I think you just, when you put it on paper and you go through the matchups and you actually line the two teams up against each other, I mean, my gut goes Dublin, simply for the fact that I think that the Dublin defence would hold the Kerry forward line sufficiently. And I'm not just sure that the same would apply the other way.
I tend to agree. The only thing is I'd love to see, like when we were talking about, we think Mike McCarthy could get exposed in a man-on-man situation by a couple of those Dublin forwards, when we tried to find what matchups would work. But if he was playing in modern football, he'd probably be the spare man back, and he could do the Cillian O'Sullivan type job. So that's the only thing. I'd be very curious to see that. But I think overall, it's hard enough to go against Dublin here. We'll throw it out to the public vote on our game.ie. Don't forget to vote underneath the video on the website there, and we'll have another video coming soon. So thanks very much, as always, Cahair O'Kane.
Good man, Shane. Thanks.